The person sitting across from you already knows if they're going to say yes. They knew before you opened your mouth. Not because of your pitch, not because of your product, not because of anything you've said. They knew because of how you made them feel. And here's the thing most salespeople never figure out. You can have the perfect script, the perfect offer, the perfect close, and still lose. Because somewhere in that conversation, you made them feel judged, criticized, small. And the moment that happened, the sale was already dead. In this episode, I'm going to show you exactly how to make people feel safe enough to say yes, using ideas that have been proven for almost 100 years. You'll walk away with a totally different way of seeing why people buy, why they resist, and how to become someone they actually want to work with. If this sounds like an episode for you, don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Sales Evolution Lab, exploring the science of selling, from past wisdom to future innovation.
Welcome back, my friends. I'm Kyle Mackey, and if you're here, you're someone who takes selling seriously. You don't want tricks, you don't want hype, you want mastery, the kind that feels calm, confident, and earned. Today, we're going deep into a book that has sold over 30 million copies since 1936. A book that's been translated into almost every language on earth. A book that changed the careers of some of the most successful business people, politicians, and leaders of the last century. I'm talking about Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, I know you might be thinking, Kyle, that book is almost 90 years old. What could it possibly teach me about selling today? And I get it. I had the same reaction the first time someone handed me a copy. I was 19 years old, working the floor at Movati Athletics, selling personal training, packages to people who walked in off the street with no plan to buy anything. One call closes, no follow-ups, no warm leads, just you, them, and maybe 20 minutes to change their mind about their whole life. And I was struggling, not with the product, not with the presentation. I knew the packages inside and out. I could explain the benefits, handle objections, deal with price pushbacks, but I kept hitting this wall. People would nod along, they'd seem interested. They'd say things like, yeah, that sounds good. And then right at the moment of commitment, something would shift. Their energy would change. And I'd hear those 6 words that haunt every salesperson. I need to think about it. I didn't get it. I was doing everything right. I was hitting all the points. I was following the script, but I was missing something big. And then my manager, a guy who'd been selling personal training for over a decade, handed me this beat up copy of Carnegie's book. He didn't give me a speech. He just said, read the first 3 chapters, then come talk to me. So I did. And what I found in those pages changed everything. Not because Carnegie gave me a new closing trick, not because he taught me some clever way of handling objections. He showed me something deeper. He showed me that the problem wasn't my pitch. The problem was me. The way I was showing up, the way I was making people feel, the little signals I was sending that told people I cared more about my commission than about them. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That book became my Bible. I carried it with me for years, through my time at Movati, through my move into face-to-face fundraising, through leading teams across New Zealand and Australia, through coaching salespeople who hit the same wall I once did. And today, I want to share with you the lessons that mattered most. Not as a book summary, not as a history lesson, but as a real living set of ideas that will change the way you sell and the way you connect with everyone around you. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why people resist, why they trust, and why they say yes. You'll have the real tools you can use in your very next conversation. And you'll see every interaction differently. Not as a transaction, but as a chance to make someone feel truly understood. Because here's the promise I'm making you right now. These ideas aren't just nice thoughts. They're not just theory. They're battle-tested truths that have been working for almost a century. And they work just as well today as they did in 1936. Let me give you an example. Carnegie tells the story of a guy who ran a company with 314 employees. For years, this guy had been harsh, demanding, quick to criticize, and slow to praise. He drove his people hard, and they hated him for it. They weren't just unhappy, they were enemies. 314 people who dreaded seeing him walk through the door. Then he learned these ideas, and he made a choice to change. He stopped criticizing. He started noticing what people did right instead of hunting for what they did wrong. And here's what happened. Those 314 enemies became 314 friends. Not overnight, but faster than you'd think. Because these people who used to avoid him started calling him by his first name. The energy at work shifted. Loyalty went up. Productivity went up. Profits went up. Same company, same people, same product, but a completely different approach. That's what we're talking about today. Not becoming a better pitcher, not becoming a smoother talker, becoming someone that people want to say yes to, someone they trust, someone they feel safe with. And that journey starts with the most counterintuitive idea in all of selling: the absolute need to never criticize anyone. But here's the thing. Telling you not to criticize is easy. Understanding why it matters so much, why it's the foundation everything else is built on, that means going somewhere uncomfortable. It means looking at the darker side of how people really think. So let me tell you about a guy named Francis Crowley. Back in the 1930s, Crowley was one of the most dangerous criminals in New York. The newspapers called him Two Gun Crowley, and he earned that name. He killed a cop, a police officer who just walked up to his car and asked to see his license. That's it. That's all the guy did. Crowley pulled out his gun and shot him. Then he grabbed the officer's gun and shot him again, just to make sure. Cold-blooded, right? No conscience, a killer. Now, why am I telling you about a cop killer on a sales podcast? Because what happened next shows you something about people that will change how you sell forever. Stick with me here. When the police finally tracked Crowley down, they cornered him in his girlfriend's apartment. 150 cops outside, bullets flying everywhere. This goes on for hours. And while all this is happening, while Crowley is bleeding, while he's shooting back, he's writing a letter. You know what it said? Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one. One that would do nobody any harm. A kind heart that would do nobody any harm. This guy just killed a cop. And in his own head, he's the good guy. He's the one being picked on. When they put him in the electric chair, his last words weren't sorry. They weren't, I made a mistake. He said, this is what I get for defending myself. Here's the point. Nobody blames themselves, ever. Not Crowley, not guys on death row, not crooked politicians, not CEOs who run companies into the ground, not the spouse who cheated. Nobody. There was a guy named Lewis Laws who ran a prison for years. He talked to hundreds of men who were about to be executed. And he said something I've never forgotten. He said almost none of them thought they were bad people. They all had reasons. They all had stories. They could all explain exactly why they had to do what they did. They talked themselves into it, even believed it themselves. So here's my question. If killers can't admit they did something wrong, what makes you think your prospect is going to be any different? When you point out what's wrong with their situation, when you tell them their thinking is off. When you show them their past choices weren't working, you think they're going to say, you know what? You're right. I've been doing this all wrong. They won't. They can't, because criticism does one thing, just one thing. It makes people defend themselves. And once someone is defending themselves, they're not hearing you anymore. They're not open. They're putting up walls. You know that feeling, right? Someone criticizes you, even nicely, even trying to help, and you feel that heat in your chest, that tightness in your jaw, that need to push back, to explain yourself. That's what you're setting off in your prospect every time you say, well, actually. Every time you hint they made a bad call. Every time you suggest what they're doing isn't working. You might be totally right. You might be totally correct. That doesn't matter, because being right and being effective, not the same thing. Carnegie tells this great story about Lincoln. We think of Lincoln as this wise, patient guy, but he wasn't always like that. When he was young, Lincoln loved writing nasty letters. He'd tear apart his political opponents in his newspapers. Really mean stuff. And one day, he went too far. He wrote this anonymous letter ripping into a politician named James Shield. It was brutal. Made the good guy look like a fool. And when Shields found out Lincoln wrote it, he challenged him to a duel with swords. Think about this. Abraham Lincoln, tall, skinny, awkward Lincoln, standing on a sandbar by the Mississippi River, holding a sword, about to fight for his life, all because he couldn't stop himself from criticizing someone. They called off the duel at the last second, but Lincoln never forgot it. From that day on, he made a rule. No more nasty letters. No more making fun of people in public. And after that, he almost never criticized anyone for anything. Even during the Civil War, his generals kept messing up. One guy wouldn't move his troops. Another one let the whole enemy army get away after a major battle. Everyone wanted these generals gone. Lincoln's own team was screaming for it, but Lincoln held back because he got something most people never figure out. Criticism doesn't change people. It just makes them dig in. And that resistance, that's the enemy of everything you're trying to do in sales. So what do you do instead? If you can't point out the problems, if you can't show people where they're going wrong, how do you actually help them move forward? That's where Carnegie's second big idea comes in. He calls it the big secret of dealing with people. And it comes down to one thing: the deepest need in human nature. Not food, not safety, not even love. The need to feel important. A psychologist named William James put it like this: the deepest thing in human nature is the need to be appreciated. Not the want, not the preference, the need. And when you learn to meet that need, really, honestly, consistently, everything changes. You're not tricking people. You're not running some move on them. You're giving them something they've been hungry for their whole lives. The feeling of being seen, of being valued, of mattering to someone. And a world where everyone is busy, everyone is distracted, everyone is looking at their phone instead of the person in front of them, that becomes the most valuable thing you can give. This is what finally clicked for me at Movati. I wasn't losing sales because my pitch was bad. I was losing them because I was so focused on what I wanted, the close, the commission, the number, that I forgot to make the person in front of me feel like they mattered. And I was being critical without even knowing it. I'd tell them their workout routine wasn't working. I'd point out they weren't getting results on their own. I'd hint that they didn't really know what they were doing. All true, all correct, all working against me. Because every little criticism, even the small ones, was taking something out of the relationship. And by the time I got to the close, there was nothing left. They didn't trust me. They didn't feel safe. They didn't think I actually cared about them. So they said, I need to think about it. And they left. Things changed when I stopped trying to be right. I started trying to make them feel heard. When I asked questions because I really wanted to understand, not because I was steering them somewhere. When I started noticing the effort they put in, the guts it took to walk through those doors, how hard it is to admit you want something to change, that's when it turned around. And that's what we're going to dig into for the rest of this episode. Real, practical stuff that will change how you connect with people. So let's get into it. Because knowing you shouldn't criticize is one thing. Learning how to actually make people feel valued, that's where it gets real. Here's something that will save you more deals than any closing trick ever will. The moment you make someone feel stupid, you've lost them forever. I want to take you back to a Thursday afternoon at Movati Athletics. The gym was quiet, the dead zone between lunch rush and afternoon work crowd. A woman walked in, mid-40s, nervous energy. You could see it in the way she held her purse, the way her eyes kept moving around the gym. Her name was Sandra. She'd filled out a guest pass online, and I was up. So I walked over, introduced myself, shook her hand, and within 5 minutes, I knew her story. 3 kids, tough job in healthcare, a husband who traveled for work, a body that didn't feel like hers anymore. She tried everything: Weight Watchers, beach body programs, a couple months at Planet Fitness. She'd bought equipment for her basement that was now collecting dust. And somewhere in that conversation, I made a big mistake. She was telling me about her basement gym, the treadmills, the dumbbells, the yoga mat. And I said something like, yeah, home workouts are tough. Most people can't stay consistent without accountability. That's why gyms with personal training work so much better. Seems harmless, right? I was just stating a fact. I was just showing the value of what we offer. But watch what actually happened. Sandra had just told me about years of effort, years of trying, years of hope and letdown, getting back up again. And what did I do? I basically told her all that effort was wrong. That she'd been doing it the wrong way. That she needed us to succeed. I didn't mean it that way, but that's how she heard it. And I saw it happen. This little shift in her posture, the way she pulled back, the way her answers got shorter. By the time we got to pricing, she was already gone. I need to think about it, she said. And she never came back. Here's what I didn't get back then. Criticism, even when it's accurate, even when you're trying to help, set off the oldest alarm system in the human brain. A psychologist named Dr. Skinner shows this in his research. An animal that gets rewarded for good behavior learns way faster than an animal that gets punished for bad behavior. And what's true for animals is true for people too. When you criticize someone, when you tell them they've been doing it wrong, when you point out where they failed, you're not teaching them, you're attacking them. Not on purpose, not physically, but emotionally. That's exactly what's happening. And the brain treats emotional attacks the same way it treats physical threats: fight, flight, or freeze. Sandra didn't fight me. She didn't argue. She just quietly decided I wasn't safe, that I didn't get her, that I was just another person who was going to make her feel bad about herself. And she protected herself the only way she could. She left. Carnegie tells a story about a pilot named Bob Hoover. Hoover was flying back from an air show when both engines cut out. Through some amazing flying, he managed to land the plane safely, just barely. When he checked the aircraft, he found the problem. Someone had filled it with jet fuel instead of gasoline. The mechanic who made the mistake was a wreck. He stood there with tears running down his face, waiting for Hoover to explode. and he would have deserved it. This wasn't a small mistake. This mistake almost killed Bob Hoover. So what did Hoover do? He walked up to the mechanic, put his arm around the guy's shoulder and said, "To show you, I'm sure you'll never do this again, I want you to service my F-51 tomorrow." Not a word of criticism, not a hint of anger, just faith, just trust. And here's the thing. That mechanic would have done anything for Bob Hoover after that moment. Not because Hoover left him off so easy, not because Hoover pretended the mistake didn't matter, but because Hoover understood something. The mechanic already knew he messed up. The guilt was already there. The lesson was already learned. Piling criticism on top of that would have done nothing except destroy the relationship. Now think about your prospects. Think about people sitting across from you in a sales call, in discovery meetings, in the 20-minute window where you've got their attention. Most of them have already tried something. They've already made decisions. They've already put time and money and hope into stuff that didn't work. And when they come to you, they're already carrying that weight. They already feel like they failed a little. They're frustrated, maybe embarrassed that they couldn't figure it out on their own. Your job is not to add to that weight. Your job is to lift it, to make them feel like their past effort weren't wasted. They were just steps on the journey, to make them feel like they were smart for trying, even if it didn't work out, to make them feel like coming to you isn't admitting failure. It's being wise. Can you feel the difference? One small approach makes them feel smaller. One approach makes them feel bigger. One approach puts them on the wall. One approach opens doors. So here's what I want you to practice before your next conversation, before you point out any gap, any problem, any area where your prospect is struggling. Ask yourself, how can I say this in a way that respects what they've already done? Instead of your current approach isn't working, try, you've clearly put a lot of thought into this. Let me show you something that might speed up what you've already started. Instead of most people make this mistake, try, this is actually one of the hardest parts. Even really smart people get stuck here. Instead of here's what you should be doing, try, here's what I've seen work for people in similar spots. The information is the same. The truth is the same, but how it lands is completely different. You're not telling them they're wrong. You're inviting them to try something new. And that invitation, that safety, is what opens the doors to trust. Carnegie includes a piece in his book that I've never forgotten. It's called Father Forgets, written by a newspaper editor named Livingston Larned. It's a letter from a father to his sleeping son. And in it, the father admits all the ways he criticized his boy that day. He yelled at him for not cleaning his shoes, snapped at him for spilling food, found fault with his posture, his homework, the way he played. All day long, he measured his little boy against adult standards. And then that night, after the boy fell asleep, the father went into his room. He looked at the small face on the pillow, peaceful, trusting, and he felt ashamed. He realized he'd been pushing his son for just being a kid. Now, your prospects aren't children, but the idea is the same. When someone comes to you with their hopes, their fears, their half-figured out ideas about what they need, they're showing you something personal. And how you respond to that will shape everything. Will you meet them with judgment or understanding? Will you point out where they went wrong, or will you honor how far they've already come? This isn't about being soft. It's about avoiding hard truths. It's about earning the right to share those truths. And you earn that right by making someone feel safe enough to hear you. That's the foundation of everything else we're going to talk about today. Without this, without the self-control to hold back criticism, to lead with understanding instead of judgment, nothing else works. But with it, With the foundation in place, you become someone people actually want to listen to. And that leads us to the next question. If criticism is off the table, what do we offer instead? That's where Carnegie's second big idea comes in. And it's the one thing that changed how I think about what selling really is. So, take a deep breath for a second. That letter, Father Forgets, is heavy. It hits because it gets to the core of how we mess up with people. We measure them. We judge them. We criticize without even realizing it. But once you stop criticism, a vacuum is created. You have to fill it with something. And that something is what made Charles Schwab the highest paid man in America. There's a currency more valuable than money, more convincing than logic, more powerful than any closing trick you'll ever learn. And almost nobody uses it. In 1921, Charles Schwab was getting paid over $1 million a year. Not in today's money, in 1921 dollars. That's like $20 million today. Let that sink in. $20 million a year in an era when most people earn a few thousand. He was the first person in American business to ever make that kind of money. And here's what's crazy. Schwab wasn't the smartest guy at the company. He wasn't a technical genius. There were plenty of engineers and executives who knew more about steel than he did. Andrew Carnegie, the guy signing those checks, knew it. So why was Schwab worth that kind of money? Carnegie explained it simply. Schwab had an amazing ability to get people excited. And how did he do it? Through appreciation. Not flattery, not empty compliments, not the fake corporate cheerleading that everyone sees through in about 3 seconds. Real, specific, heartfelt appreciation. Schwab described it like this. I'm quick to praise, but slow to find fault. If I like something, I let people know it. That was the secret. That was the $20 million skill. The ability to make people feel valued, to make them feel seen, to make them feel like what they did mattered. Here's what Carnegie understood about people. Something that psychology has proven over and over again. There is a hunger in every person that almost never gets filled. The hunger to feel important. William James called it the deepest need in human nature, the need to be appreciated. Not the wish, not the preference, the need. Think about what that means. A need isn't something you can ignore. It doesn't go away when you distract yourself. A need like this drives behavior. It shapes decisions. And this need for importance, for recognition, for appreciation, it's running in every single person you'll ever sell to. Every CEO, every first-time buyer, every gatekeeper, every decision maker, they all have this need. And most of the time, it's not being met. Because here's the truth about the world we live in. Most people are starving for appreciation. They work hard. They try their best. They make sacrifices nobody sees. And what do they get? Criticism when they mess up. Silence when they do well. Their bosses notice when something goes wrong, but ignore their wins. Their partner remembers to complain, but forgets to say thanks. Their clients expect great work, but rarely say so. This is how most people go through their days. And when you really get that, when you feel the weight of that unmet need, everything changes. I learned this during my years doing face-to-face fundraising in New Zealand. Now, by this point, I'd been fundraising for almost 9 years. Pop-up events, shopping centers, festivals. My pitch was totally dialed. I knew how to stop people, start a conversation, and get them to sign up. I was good at it. But then I made the shift to door-to-door. And it was a whole different game. At a pop-up, if someone's not interested, they just keep walking. No big deal. You move on to the next person. But at a door, someone looks at you, decides they don't want to talk, and shuts the door in your face. that hits different. It's personal in a way that pop-ups never were. And I had to learn how to deal with that, how to not let it get to me, how to keep showing up with energy even after 10 rejections in a row. One evening, I was working a neighborhood in Auckland about 6 p.m., the sweet spot when people are home from work but haven't started dinner yet. I knocked on a door. An older woman answered. She must have been in her 70s. White hair, kind eyes, flowered apron. And instead of jumping into my script, I noticed something. Her garden. It was beautiful. Roses along the walkway. Herbs in neat rows. A bird bath in the corner with lavender all around it. And without thinking, I said, "Excuse me, before I tell you why I'm here, I have to ask, did you plant all of this yourself?" And her face changed. She didn't just smile, she lit up. "Oh," she said, "I've been working on this garden for 23 years. 23 years. And for the next 10 minutes, she told me about it. The roses were cuttings from her mother's garden. The lavender brought bees, which she loved watching on summer mornings. The bird bath was a gift from her late husband. I just listened, asked questions, appreciated. And when she finally asked what I was doing in the neighborhood, I told her about the charity. She signed up on the spot. Not because my pitch was good, not because I had the best stats or the most powerful story, but because I'd done something that almost nobody had done for her in a long time. I noticed her. I appreciated her work. I made her feel like she mattered. That garden was 23 years of effort and love and care, and most people just walked right past it. I stopped and saw it. That's the power of appreciation. Now, here's where most people get this wrong. They hear appreciation and they think flattery. They think they need to shower people with compliments, tell them how great they are, butter them up before going for the close. And that backfires almost every time because people can feel the difference between real appreciation and being played. Carnegie was clear about this. He said the difference between appreciation and flattery is simple. One is real, the other's fake. One comes from the heart, the other comes from the teeth. When you flatter someone, you're using them. When you appreciate someone, you're seeing them. And people know the difference right away. So how do you make sure your appreciation is real? Here's the test I use. Before I appreciate anything, I ask myself, is this actually true? Do I actually admire this? Would I say this if I had nothing to gain? If the answer is yes, I say it. If the answer is no, I stay quiet. Because fake appreciation is worse than none at all. It breaks trust. It makes people feel used. It creates the opposite of connection. But real appreciation, honest, specific, from the heart, is like water in the desert. Think about your last few sales conversation. How much time did you spend appreciating your prospect? Not complimenting, not flattering, appreciating. Noticing the challenges they've worked through, recognizing the effort they've already put in, seeing the things they're proud of, their team, their growth, how far they've come. Most salespeople spend zero time on this. They're so locked into their agenda, qualifying, presenting, handling objections, closing, that they forget the human being sitting in front of them. And that human being is starving. Not for your solution, not for your features and benefits, for recognition, for appreciation, for someone to finally see them. Carnegie tells a story about a young boy named Stevie Morris. Stevie was born early, and too much oxygen in his incubator damaged his eyes. He was blind. He went to school like any other kid, but things weren't easy. He couldn't see the board, couldn't read the books. He was different. And then one day, his teacher noticed something. The other kids were looking for a mouse that had gotten into the classroom. They could hear it scratching in the walls, but they couldn't find it. Stevie said, "It's over there in the corner behind the bookshelf." And he was right. His teacher could have said nothing, could have just moved on with the lesson. Instead, she stopped the class and said, "Stevie, you have incredible ears. You heard exactly where the mouse was when none of us could find it. What a gift you have." That moment of appreciation changed his life. Stevie Morris grew up to become Stevie Wonder. And he's talked about how this teacher's recognition, that moment of being seen for what he could do instead of what he couldn't, helped him find his gift of music. One moment of real appreciation. One person who noticed what was special instead of what was missing. That's the power you hold in every conversation. Here's your practice for this lesson. In your next 3 conversations, sales calls, meetings, even chats with coworkers, find something specific and real to appreciate. Not "great job," that's too vague. Not "love what you're doing," that's empty. Something specific. The way you laid out the presentation made it so easy to follow. I can tell you've put real thought into how your team works. The fact that you've grown this far without outside money is really impressive. Specific, real, from the heart. And watch what happens. Watch how people open up. Watch how the energy in the room shifts. Watch how suddenly they want to keep talking to you. That's not manipulation. That's human connection. And it's the foundation of every lasting relationship in the sales and in life. But appreciation alone isn't enough, because the question remains, once you've made someone feel valued, how do you actually move them towards action? That's where Carnegie's 3rd big idea comes in. And it's the one that separates average salespeople from great ones. You want to know the difference between average salesperson and the ones who seem to close without even trying? It's not their product knowledge. It's not their confidence. It's not their closing tricks. It's one simple shift that people never make. They stop talking about what they want and start talking about what the other person wants. Carnegie tells a story that I think about all the time. Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the greatest thinkers in American history, was out in his barn one afternoon with his son. They were trying to get a calf into the barn, and the calf was not having it. Emerson pushed. His son pulled. They struggled and strained, and the calf just planted his feet and refused to move. Now, you'd think a guy as smart as Emerson would figure it out, but he was stuck. They were both stuck. And then their housekeeper walked by. She didn't know philosophy. She hadn't written any famous essays, but she knew calves. She walked up to the animal, put her finger in its mouth, and gently led it into the barn while it sucked on her finger. What Emerson couldn't do with force, she did with understanding. That calf didn't want to go into the barn. It wanted to suck on something. That's what calves do. She gave it what it wanted, and in return, she got what she wanted. That's the whole idea of influence in one simple picture. Here's what Carnegie says, and I want you to really hear this. The only way to influence people is to talk about what they want. The only way. Not one way among many, not a trick to use sometimes. The only way. Think about what that means for how we sell. Most salespeople spend 80% of their conversations talking about their product, their service, their company, their solution, features and benefits, pricing and packages, what makes them different. And you know what the prospect is thinking the whole time? What does this have to do with me? Because they're not interested in your product. They're interested in their problems. They're not interested in your features. They're interested in their results. They're not interested in your company story. They're interested in their own story and whether you can help them write a better chapter. Let me tell you about a conversation that changed how I sold forever. I was maybe 6 months into my job at Movati Athletics. I'd had some success by then, learned the ropes, closed some deals, started to build confidence, but I was still making a big mistake. A guy named Marcus walked in, late 20s, athletic build. Clearly someone who already knew his way around the gym. I started my usual pitch: personal training, accountability, custom programs, nutrition guidance. And Marcus just looked at me and said, I know all this stuff. I've been training for years. I eat clean. I track my macros. I don't need a trainer to tell me what to do. I could feel the sales slipping away. So I did something I hadn't done before. I stopped pitching and I started asking, you're clearly in great shape. What brought you in today? He was quiet for a second. Then he said, my girlfriend just left me. Said I spend too much time at the gym, that I'm obsessed, that I use fitness as an escape instead of dealing with my feelings. And just like that, the whole conversation shifted. This wasn't about training. This wasn't about programs. This was about Marcus trying to prove himself that he wasn't broken, that he could be balanced, that he could have discipline without destroying his relationships. Once I understood that, I knew exactly how to position personal training. Not as a way to get more fit. He was already fit, but as a way to get efficient, to hit his goals in less time, to free up space in his life for other things, to show himself and maybe a future partner that fitness could be part of his life without taking over. That's what Marcus wanted. And when I spoke to that want, he didn't hesitate. He signed up for 6 months on the spot. Here's what most salespeople miss. The want is almost never what you think it is. People don't buy personal training. They buy confidence or health or revenge on an ex or the feeling of being in control. People don't buy software. They buy efficiency or security or looking smart to their boss or peace of mind. People don't buy consulting. They buy certainty or validation or someone to share the weight of making decisions. The product is just the vehicle. The want is the destination. Your job is to understand the destination before you ever talk about the vehicle. Now, here's something important. When you discover what someone really wants, whether it's revenge or confidence or proving someone wrong, you're not there to judge that. You're not there to validate negative feelings either. You're there to be their ally, to help them get where they want to go. That's the difference between manipulation and service. Manipulation uses that learn against them. Service uses what you learn to help them. When Marcus told me what he really wanted, I didn't say, yeah, show her she was wrong. I helped him see a path to the balanced life he was actually looking for. That's the key. A British Prime Minister named Lloyd George said the secret to his success was baiting the hook to suit the fish. You don't put strawberries and cream on a fishing hook because you like strawberries and cream. You put a worm on the hook because that's what the fish wants. Same idea, different species. So let me ask you, in the last 10 sales conversations, how many started with you trying to understand what the other person truly wanted? Not what they said they wanted, not the surface level answer they gave you when you asked about their goals, the deep want, the thing that's really driving the decision. Because here's the truth. Most people don't fully understand their own wants. They know they feel stuck. They know something needs to change, but they haven't put words to what that change would really mean. Part of your job is to help them discover that, not by telling them what they should want, but by asking questions that lead them to their own answers. What would be different if this problem was solved? What would you feel if this was handled? What would it mean for you, not just for your business, if this worked out? These questions invite the prospect to connect with their own deeper reasons. And once they feel that connection, they don't need to be sold. They've already sold themselves. Carnegie tells a story about a father trying to get his young son to eat. Every meal was a battle. the boy wouldn't touch his food. The parents begged, bribed, threatened. Nothing worked. Then the father thought about what the boy actually wanted. There was a neighborhood bully, a bigger kid who would ride by his tricycle and knock the smaller boy off of his own trike. He drove the boy crazy. So the father said something like, if you ate your breakfast every morning and you grow up big and strong, and one day you'd be able to beat that big kid who keeps pushing you around. The boy ate his breakfast. Not because the father convinced him with logic, but because the father connected the food to something the boy desperately wanted. The food didn't change. The father's goal didn't change, but the framing changed. And the framing is everything. Here's what I want you to try in your next conversation. Before you pitch anything, before you present, before you demo, before you talk about your solution, spend at least 5 minutes just understanding. Ask open questions about what they want, not just what they need. Needs are logical. Wants are emotional. What would success look like for you? What's the dream outcome here? If we could have a magic wand and fix this perfectly, what would that look like? Listen for the emotion behind the answer. That's where the real want lives. And then, only then, position your solution in terms of that want. Don't talk about what your product does. Talk about how your product delivers what they just told you they wanted. That's the shift from broadcasting to connecting, from presenting to resonating, from convincing to aligning. And you know what this really takes? Real curiosity. Not the fake kind where you ask questions just to check a box, just to get through the discovery so you can start selling. Real curiosity about who this person is and what they're trying to do. Because when you genuinely curious, people feel it. They relax, they open up. They tell you things you haven't told anyone. And in that openness, you find the real want. The one they might not even know they had. That's where the magic happens. That's where sales stops feeling like selling and starts feeling like service, because you're not pushing something on them. You're helping them get something they actually want. And now we move from principles into the practice, because once you understand these first 3 ideas, don't criticize, appreciate genuinely, and talk about what they want, the question becomes, how do you actually show up in a way that makes people want to be around you? That's where Carnegie's 6 ways to make people like you begin. Now, I have to be honest with you. Most people think they're already good at what I'm about to share. They think they're likable. They think they connect well with people. They think they're doing things the right way. They're not. Most people are actually repelling prospects without knowing it. And I was one of them for years. So before you tune out and think, I've got this part covered, stay with me. Because the gap between what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing, the gap is where deals go to die. Here's something that changes how you think about relationships. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. That's not poetry, that's psychology. And it's the foundation of everything that follows. The first year I shifted to face-to-face fundraising full time, I had a breakthrough that seemed to come out of nowhere. I went from being solid, middle of the pack, hitting my numbers, to leading the board. Week after week, my sign-up rate kept climbing. My average donation was higher. My retention, the percentage of donors who kept giving month after month, was the best on the team. My manager pulled me aside and asked what had changed. And honestly, I didn't have a good answer at first. I was using the same script, the same opening, the same close, but something was different. It took me a few weeks to figure out what it was. I stopped caring about my numbers Not in the sense that I didn't want to succeed. I still wanted to hit targets. I still wanted to do well. But somewhere along the way, I'd shifted from trying to get signups to genuinely wanting to understand the people I was talking to. I'd become interested, really interested, not as a trick, not as a way to get them to like me, but because I'd realized something. Every single person I talked to had a story worth knowing. The retired teacher who spent 40 years in the classroom, the young couple who just got back from traveling the world, the widow who walked up to the booth wearing her late husband's cardigan. Every person I spoke with was a window into a life I knew nothing about. And once I started to see it that way, once I genuinely got curious about who these people were, everything changed. My conversations got longer, my connections got deeper, and the signups took care of themselves. Here's what was happening under the surface. When you show real interest in someone, you're giving them something rare, attention, real, focused, undivided attention. Think about how rare that is today. Everyone is distracted. Everyone is half listening while they check their phones. Think about their next meeting. Plan what they're going to say next. When was the last time someone gave you their complete attention? When was the last time you felt truly heard by another person? It doesn't happen often. And when it does, it's memorable. A psychologist named Alfred Adler said something that still gives me chills. He said, "The people who are not interested in others have the greatest problem in life and cause the greatest harm to others. All human failure comes from people who don't care about the people around them." Hear that again. The people who struggle most are the ones who aren't interested in others. The people who succeed, who build deep relationships, who earn loyalty, who lead, are the ones who are genuinely curious about everyone around them. Carnegie tells a story about Theodore Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's helper, a guy named James Amos. Amos worked for Roosevelt for years, and long after Roosevelt died, he wrote a book about his time with him. One story stood out. Roosevelt and his wife were sitting on the porch one evening when Roosevelt suddenly jumped up. He grabbed Amos and said, "Come with me, quick." He led Amos across the yard, pointed up into a tree, and showed him a small bird that had been calling. "Look," Roosevelt said, "listen to that." And they stood there together, the former president of the United States and his helper, watching a bird. Why does this matter? Because Roosevelt didn't have to share that moment with Amos. Amos was staff. Back then, that kind of closeness wasn't expected, but Roosevelt felt genuinely interested in people. All people, not just the powerful ones. And that interest, that willingness to share joy with whoever was nearby, created loyalty that lasted a lifetime. Amos would have done anything for Roosevelt, not because of his title, not because of his power, because Roosevelt saw him, really saw him. Now, let me ask you something uncomfortable. In your sales conversations, are you genuinely interested in the people you're talking to, or are you interested in what they can do for you? Be honest. Because here's the thing, most of us, if we're really honest, are coming from a place of self-interest. We want the sale, we want the commission, we want the win. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But if that's all we want, if we see the person across from us as just a means to an end, they feel it. They might not be able to say what they're feeling. They might not even know why they don't quite trust us, but something in them will hold back because people can sense when someone is trying to get something from them. And they can sense when someone is genuinely curious about who they are. So here's what I want you to practice. Before your next sales conversation, set an intention. Say to yourself out loud if you can, I am genuinely curious about this person. I want to understand their world. And then during that conversation, look for one thing that has nothing to do with the sale. a photo on their desk, a hobby they mention, something about their background, their family, their interests, and ask about it. Not as a trick, not as a rapport building exercise, but because you're actually curious. I noticed you have a picture of a sailboat. Do you sail? You've mentioned you're from Cleveland originally. What brought you out here? I saw you've been with this company for 12 years. That's rare these days. What kept you here? These questions open doors. They move the conversation from business to human, and they create the kind of connection that closes deals and builds lasting relationships. Here's what Carnegie understood that most people miss. You can't fake genuine interest. You can fake excitement. You can fake confidence. You can even fake knowing what you're doing for a little while, but you cannot fake caring about another person. So what do you do if you're not naturally curious about people? You develop it. Like any skill, genuine interest can be built. Start by assuming that every person you meet knows something you don't. Every person has been through something you haven't. Every person has a piece of the puzzle you're missing. That assumption that everyone has something valuable to offer is the seed of real curiosity. Water that seed. Practice it every day and watch how your relationships change. But here's the thing. Genuine interest is internal. It's something you feel. The question is, how do you show it? How do you communicate to someone that you're interested, that you care, that you're happy to be talking with them? And that brings us to the simplest and most powerful tool Carnegie ever talked about. You know what says more than your words, your credentials, and your whole presentation combined? Your face. Whether you look like someone people want to be around. Carnegie puts it simply. Your smile is a messenger of goodwill. It says, I like you. You make me happy. I'm glad to see you. No words needed. And this isn't just feel-good advice. This is how the brain actually works. When you smile at someone, something happens in their head. Mirror neurons fire. Without ever thinking about it, they start to mirror your expressions. Their face relaxes into a smile too. And here's the magic. The act of smiling, even if it starts as just a response to you, triggers good feelings in their brain. You literally make people feel better just by smiling at them. Try doing this with PowerPoint. Carnegie tells the story of a stockbroker named William Steinhardt. Steinhardt had a problem. He was, by his own words, a grouch, grumpy in the morning, short with his wife, curt with his coworkers, the kind of guy who spreads tension just by walking into a room. And it was hurting everything, his marriage, his business, his health. So Steinhardt tried something. He decided to force himself to smile, not because he felt like it. He didn't feel like it at all, but because he'd read that action can change feeling. A philosopher named William James put it this way. We think feelings come first and actions follow, but really they go together. And by changing your action, you can change your feelings. In other words, if you smile, you'll start to feel happier. If you act confident, you start to feel confident. The body leads the mind. So Steinhardt started smiling. He smiled at his wife in the morning. He smiled at the doorman. He smiled at the elevator operator, at his coworker, at his clients. And at first it felt ridiculous, forced, fake, but something started to happen. People responded differently to him. They were warmer, more open, more helpful. His wife noticed the change and asked what happened. His business started improving. Clients who had been distant became friendlier. And eventually, the forced smile became real. Because when you give warmth, you get warmth back. I saw this play out during my time in fundraising. There were days when I didn't feel like smiling, days when the rejection was getting to me, days when I just wanted to go home. But I learned something. If I walked up to a door looking tired, looking defeated, looking like I didn't want to be there, that's exactly how people treated me. They'd shut the door fast. They wouldn't give me a chance. But if I took a breath before I knocked, if I put a genuine smile on my face, if I looked like someone who was happy to see them, everything changed. They'd smile back. They'd give me time. They'd actually listen. The smile wasn't manipulation. It was an invitation. It said, this is going to be a pleasant conversation. You're safe with me. Here's the thing though. It has to be real. Carnegie was clear about this. An insincere grin doesn't fool anyone. People can spot a fake smile from across the room. The difference is in the eyes. A real smile reaches the eyes. A fake one stays stuck on the mouth. So how do you smile for real when you don't feel like it? You don't fake the smile. You change what you're thinking about. Before I knocked on a door, I think about something that genuinely made me happy. A funny moment from earlier that day. Something I was looking forward to. A person I loved. And that thought would bring a real smile. Not performed, not forced, real. Here's your practice for this lesson. For the next week, before every sales conversation, whether it's a call, a meeting, or a casual chat, take 5 seconds. Think of something that makes you genuinely happy. Let that feeling show on your face. And then start the conversation. Watch how people respond differently. Watch how the whole energy shifts. It's such a simple thing, but it changes everything. And there's another tool that's just as simple, just as powerful, and almost nobody uses it well. And it's the sound of a person's own name. Carnegie said that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Think about that. Of all the words in all the languages in the world, the one that matters most to someone is their own name. There's a reason for that. Your name is yours. It's been yours since the day you were born. It's connected to your identity, your sense of self. When someone uses your name, they're not just getting your attention. They're saying, I see you as an individual. You're not just another face. You matter enough for me to remember who you are. Carnegie tells the story of a political man named Jim Farley. Farley could remember 50,000 people by their first names. 50,000. And that skill was a huge part of why he was so successful. When he walked into a room, he didn't just shake hands, he called people by name. And those people never forgot it. There's another story about a man named Andrew Carnegie, no relation to the author, spoke about him earlier. This was Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, one of the richest men in history. And he understood the power of names better than almost anyone. When Carnegie wanted to win a big contract, he didn't just make the best offer. He named the project after the person he was trying to impress. There's a steel works called the Edgar Thomas Steel Works, named after the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Carnegie wanted his business, so he named something after him, and it worked. When Carnegie wanted to merge with the Pullman Palace Car Company, he did the same thing. He offered to name the new company after Pullman. What are you going to call it? Pullman asked. The Pullman Palace Car Company, of course, Carnegie said. Pullman face lit up. Deal done. Now, you probably don't have steelworks to name after your prospect, but the principle is the same. Use their name. Remember their name. Make them feel like they matter enough to be remembered. I learned this the hard way. Early in my sales career, I was terrible with names. Someone would tell me their name, and 30 seconds later, it was gone. I'd spend the whole conversation avoiding using their name because I'd already forgotten it, and I could feel the distance it created. Then I started doing something simple. When someone told me their name, I'd repeat it back immediately. Nice to meet you, Sarah. Then I'd use it again within the first minute. So, Sarah, what brought you in today? And one more time before the end of the conversation. Sarah, It was really great talking with you. 3 times. That's all it takes to lock a name into your memory. And the effect on people is amazing. When you use someone's name, they lean in. They pay more attention. They feel like you're talking to them specifically, not just delivering a script. It's such a small difference, but it makes a huge difference. Carnegie tells a story about a cafeteria worker named Eunice. She worked behind the counter serving food, and she always looked miserable, scowling, unhappy, slopping food onto plates without looking up. One day, a guy came through the line, and instead of just asking for his food, he looked at her name tag and said, "Good morning, Eunice." Her whole face changed. She looked up, she smiled, she piled extra food onto his plate, all because he used her name. All because he saw her as a person, not just someone serving food. That's the power of a name. Here's your practice. In your next 5 conversations, make a point to use the person's name at least 3 times. Once at the beginning, once in the middle, once at the end. And watch what happens. Watch how the connection deepens. Watch how they respond to you differently. It costs you nothing, but it gives them something invaluable. The feeling of being recognized, of being remembered, of being seen. And that leads us to maybe the most underrated skill in all of selling. The skill that makes everyone think you're fascinating, even when you barely say a word. So here's something that will probably surprise you. Carnegie tells a story about going to a dinner. He sat next to a botanist, a guy who studied plants, and for hours they talked. Well, the botanist talked. Carnegie listened. He asked questions. He showed interest, but he barely said anything about himself. At the end of the night, the botanist told the host Carnegie was one of the most interesting conversationalists he ever met. Think about that. Carnegie hardly spoken, and yet he was called an interesting conversationalist. How does that work? Here's the secret. To be interesting, be interested. That's it. You don't have to become fascinating by talking about yourself. You become fascinating by getting other people to talk about themselves. And then actually listen. Most people are terrible listeners. They're not really listening. They're waiting for their turn to talk. They're thinking about what they're going to say next. They're half paying attention while their minds wander somewhere else. And people can feel it. They can tell when you're not really there. But when someone truly listens, when someone gives you their full attention, when someone asks follow-up questions that show they actually heard what you said, that's rare and that's memorable. Carnegie understood that people are far more interested in themselves than they are in you. He even cites a study. In 500 phone conversations, the word that came up most often was I. People use the word I almost 4,000 times. We're obsessed with ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just human nature. The mistake is thinking that to win someone over, you need to impress them with your story, your achievements, your knowledge. But that's backwards. You win people over by letting them tell their story, by being the audience they've been waiting for. I learned this in a painful way. Early in my career, I thought being a great salesperson meant being a great talker. I'd practice my pitch, polish my stories, work on my delivery, and I'd show up to conversations ready to perform. But the more I talked, the less I sold. It wasn't until I started shutting up that things changed. I'd ask a question and then just listen. Not for an opening to jump in, not for a chance to make my point, just listen and let them talk. Sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 10. And by the end, they felt like we'd had an amazing conversation, even though I'd almost said nothing. There's a story Carnegie tells about Abraham Lincoln. During one of the hardest moments of his presidency, Lincoln called on an old friend to the White House. He talked to this friend for hours about whether he should free the slaves. He went through every argument, every angle, every possible outcome. And when he was done, he thanked his friend and sent him home. The friend hadn't given a single piece of advice. Lincoln hadn't asked for any. He just needed someone to listen, a sympathetic ear, someone to hear him think out loud. And that was enough. Your prospects are the same way. Sometimes they don't need your solution. They need to be heard. They need someone who will let them talk through their problems, who will ask good questions and then actually listen to the answers. And in that process, they'll often convince themselves. You don't have to do the selling. They'll do it for you. Here's the practice. In your next conversation, try this. Ask a question and then don't say anything for at least 30 seconds after they finish answering. Just wait. Let the silence sit there. 9 times out of 10, they'll keep talking. They'll go deeper. They'll tell you things they wouldn't have said if you jumped in. Silence feels awkward at first. We're so used to filling every gap. But silence is where the real stuff comes out. The stuff they haven't told anyone else. The stuff that tells you exactly what they need. Learn to be comfortable with silence. Learn to let people talk, and you'll become the most interesting person in the room without saying much at all. We've covered a lot of ground today. 7 big ideas that will change how you connect with people, how you sell, how you lead, how you show up in every conversation. Now let's bring it all together. Here's what to remember before your next conversation. Number 1, don't criticize. Ever. No matter how right you are, no matter how obvious the mistake, criticism makes people defend themselves. And once they're defending, they are not buying. Instead of pointing out what's wrong, find a way to frame it that respects their effort. Number 2, give real appreciation, not flattery, not empty compliments, real specific appreciation. Notice what people have done well. Notice the effort they've put in and tell them from the heart, not the teeth. Number 3, talk about what they want, not what you want, not your product, not your features, their goals, their fears, their dreams. Bait the hook to suit the fish. Number 4, be genuinely interested, not as a trick, for real. Every person you meet has a story worth knowing. Get curious about them and watch how they open up to you. Number 5, smile, a real smile. It changes everything. It says you're happy to be there. It makes people feel safe, and it costs you nothing. Number 6, use their name. Remember it. Say it at least 3 times in every conversation. It's the sweetest sound they'll ever hear. And number 7, listen. Really listen. Ask questions and then shut up. Let them talk. Be comfortable with silence. You'll learn more in the pauses than in the answers. That's the toolkit. 7 simple ideas that will change every conversation you have, not just in sales, in life. Here's what I want to leave you with. These ideas aren't new. They're almost 90 years old, and they work just as well today as they did when Carnegie first wrote them down. Why? Because they're not about sales tricks. They're not about clever techniques. They're about something deeper. They're about seeing people, really seeing them. In a world that's moving faster than ever, where everyone is distracted, where everyone is fighting for attention, the person who stops and actually sees another human being, that person stands out. That person builds trust. That person closes deals. Not because they're manipulating anyone, but because they're giving people what they've been starving for. Connection, recognition, the feeling of being understood. That's what selling is at its best. It's not about convincing people to buy things they don't want. It's about understanding what they truly want and helping them get it. I started this episode by telling you about a 19-year-old kid working the floor at Movati Athletic, struggling, hitting walls, hearing, I need to think about it over and over. The ideas in this book changed that kid's life. They took me from struggling to top performer, from confused to confident, from selling at people to connecting with people. And I've watched these same ideas transform hundreds of salespeople I've worked with over the years. They'll transform you too, if you let them, if you practice them, if you make them part of who you are, not just what you do. So here's my challenge to you. Pick one of the ideas from today's episode, just one, and practice it every single day for the next week. Maybe it's not criticizing. Maybe it's using people's names. Maybe it's just smiling more. Whatever it is, commit to it. Do it until it becomes automatic. And then pick another one. That's how change happens. Not all at once, one small shift at a time. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for investing the time in yourself. I don't take it lightly. And I hope this episode gave you something you can use, something real, something that makes your next conversation a little bit better. If it did, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Another struggling salesperson, a friend who's trying to build better relationships, someone who could use a reminder that the old wisdom still works. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the show. We've got a lot more coming, more books, more ideas, more conversations about what it really takes to succeed in sales and in life. I'm Kyle Mackey, and this has been the Sales Evolution Lab. I'll see you in the next one.